Hey everyone, so I'm going to be doing my presentation on My Big Fat Greek Wedding from 2002. It's a rom-com, it's a pretty funny movie, and I'm excited to look at how I was able to view it through the lens of intercultural communication with you guys today. So the first thing we're going to look at with My Big Fat Greek Wedding is specifically the Greek identity versus the phrase the xeno or the non-Greek identity that's seen kind of in this movie. Xeno is a word that the father in this movie, the Greek dad, uses to define anyone outside of the Greek identity, which immediately, of course, brings in that kind of us versus others mentality, or maybe a little bit of ethnocentrism. Liu et al. In the textbook, say that constructing an ethnic identity provides immigrants with a sense of belonging and continuity with their home culture. And we see that a lot in how they kind of do things in this movie, the Greek Portokalos family. They show that specifically in regards to their Greek identity. And it's seen most explicitly in that father, Gus, who's Tula, the main character's dad. The small Miller family, on the other hand, exhibits more of the American kind of stereotypical identity. And they don't seem to place a lot of weight on who they are culturally. Ian, one of the main characters, only makes really one mention about his identity, about being Italian at one point in the movie. And then in an article I was reading by someone named Evison, I read it was specifically about Greek people and their culture, that Greek people generally express strong feelings of cultural superiority and national pride, which is a huge theme throughout the movie. In this slide, we kind of see evidence of that from the movie. This is a picture from the opening 9-minute sequence, and it introduces the character Tula and her very Greek family. Her father, in one of the first lines of the movie, makes it very clear that she is expected to be married and have kids with a Greek man, and he makes it very clear that being Greek is everything, even everything from how they live their life to every single English word. Everything has its basis in their Greek identity. So I thought that was a pretty interesting, strong cultural identity there. And then on the other hand, when we go into the xeno identity of Ian Miller, it's very starkly contrasted to those first 9 minutes we saw with that Greek Portokalos family. The American background is pretty boring, and that's how Ian himself puts it, and that really is his cultural identity. And they kind of exaggerate that a little bit in that scene where Tula meets Ian's parents for the first time, and it's just a very funny, kind of typical American scene of not a lot of excitement. Then with another good way I thought of kind of trying to examine this movie was again utilizing the Hofstede's dimensions. And we'll look at that first from a collectivist versus an individualist viewpoint. The Portokalos family exhibits an extremely strong, family-centric cultural identity, and that ties well with what's written by Liu et al. In the textbook as well, where they say that collectivist cultures emphasize values that serve and preserve the in-group by subordinating personal goals to this end. The collective is more important than the individual. And that's something you see a lot of in how they view their Greek culture in this family, as really everything everyone does is to serve their family and to serve even their identity of being Greek people. The Millers, on the other hand, are more typically American in the fact that they kind of express the individualistic side of things. And like the textbook says, people in individualist cultures tend to stress the importance of the self and personal achievement. And you can kind of see those two collectivist and individualist themes going head to head throughout the entire movie, especially as the relationship between Ian and Tula progresses, and those two very different cultural mentalities kind of have to almost fight against each other and then get resolved towards the end of the movie. Evison writes that the social life of many Greeks is usually kept to a close circle of family and friends. So that just reinforces what the textbook says about collectivist culture, and you really get to see that in this movie. It's pretty cool. Then this scene, collectivists versus individuals in the movie, this scene is just hilarious. It's kind of a party scene where the Miller parents are invited to meet everyone in Tula's family, even though it was originally just supposed to be the parents meeting each other. And you see that clash of like this individualist and collectivist culture happening in real time. And it's a little bit disconcerting to the Millers. Moving to the masculine and feminine dynamic, there's a large element of what we would consider the masculinity dimension in the Greek culture, in the Portokalos family, whereas though you see less of the Miller family, they show more of the feminine approach where there's a lot of equality in the genders and not so much difference in the gender. It's all about kind of just being who you are. So Lou et al. Write that masculine portion or dynamic calls for a maximal distinction between how men and women are expected to think and behave, and you really do see that in the Greek side of the family, or in the Greek family here. Whereas feminine cultures like that of the Millers permit more overlapping of social roles for the sexes, so that's more permitted. This scene is just a funny scene because it demonstrates even two kind of conflicting understandings of masculinity versus femininity in the Portokalos family. So Tula wants to go to college and pursue kind of a computer education, but she's expected to stay with her dad and help out at the restaurant. So she's pretty torn about that because her father is the 100% expected authority in the home. And so she brings that up to her mom, and she says, well, he's the head, so we got to do what the head says. And then the mom says something funny, basically saying that, well, he may be the head, but I'm the neck, and women are the neck. So whatever way the neck makes the head will turn. And then sure enough, ultimately that is what allows Tula to go to college. Then moving on to the next slide about power distance. Here is a scene that I think shows kind of the heavy level of importance that the Greek family here puts on power distance, viewing and how they view hierarchy as being a good thing, with the authority of the father being unquestioned. And you can kind of see that in the scene where the romance between Tula and Ian kind of comes to light to the Greek side of the family. And for the first time they realize, like, oh no, she's dating a non-Greek. And then Ian is expected to talk to the father to get permission, and it's denied, which Tula and Ian don't really respect, going against the norm of power distance and how they would view it in that culture. He does come around as the movie progresses, though. Then in uncertainty avoidance, Evison writes that Greeks tend to be quite cautious and wary of ambiguity. According to Hofstede's Dimensions, Greek culture has the highest possible score for uncertainty avoidance. And this ties well with the textbook, where we find that high uncertainty avoidance tends to be found in collectivist cultures. And as we've already established, the Greek culture is extremely collectivist. This is made more clear throughout the movie as each member of the family has assigned roles to play throughout life, whether that's the father or a mother who raises children and makes good food and takes care of all the little Greek babies or whatever it is. Ian Miller, on the other hand, tends to take life as it comes, and we kind of see that on their first date, which is what this slide is showing, where he tells her that he originally was in college for pre-law and then just decides to change his major to go to be a teacher, which is obviously potentially a lot less money that could be made, and it just shows that he's more about making decisions that impact his happiness in the moment now, as opposed to worrying too much about uncertainty or what the future may hold. Long-term versus short-term. On this scale, the Portokalos family falls near the long-term, whereas Ian, though maybe not as much his parents, fall more into the short-term side of things. This can be seen again throughout the movie. There's that element of long-term expectations for each of the people of the Portokalos family to fulfill their role within Greek culture. And we see that with Tula as well. She's expected to be, as the textbook would say, dedicated, motivated, responsible, and educated with a sense of commitment and organizational identity and loyalty. In this case, the organization would be the family. Now, looking more explicitly at communication in this movie, we'll start with, we'll talk about verbal and nonverbal, but starting with the verbal communication, we can see that we see a little bit of indirect communication in this movie. Lou et al. Write, an indirect communication style is one in which the speaker's true intentions or needs are only implied or hinted at during the conversation. And in this scene that is on this slide, we can see how Gus's wife and the sister-in-law utilize indirect communication to kind of get him to do what they actually want him to do in the first place, but they know he won't go with it unless he thinks it's his idea. And it's basically to allow Tula to go work for the aunt. And so that's a pretty funny scene in this movie. We can see a huge contrast between elaborate and succinct differences throughout the movie, especially when you look at how things are at the Portocalis family gatherings in that Greek culture versus how things are at the Miller family gatherings. It's much more colorful or elaborate with the Portocalis, and then much more succinct with the Miller family. And in this slide, from the textbook, communication styles vary across cultures. Cultural rules govern speaking, listening, and turn-taking behaviors. So when the Miller family gets in with the Portocalos family, all of a sudden all these rules are changing and shifting around them. So again, like that party scene shows how scary that can be, actually, because the Portocalos family does exhibit much more of like that free-for-all type of communication style. Moving into nonverbal communication, one of the greatest examples, I think, that can be found of this is when Ian Miller himself meets the family of Tula's for the first time. Not just Tula or her parents, but every single cousin, aunt, uncle, and there's absolutely no personal boundaries or personal space. So he gets exposed to a much more proximically different framework than what he's used to with his own family. And it also shows a clash between low contact and high contact cultures, because haptically, Tula's family likes to touch him and kiss him, and they're all giving him hugs when they meet him, and it's just a very, very different experience than probably what he had with his own family and his own parents. And then paralanguage. Paralanguage refers to the vocal qualities that accompany speech. Voice qualities include elements like pitch, volume, tempo, rhythm, tone, pausing, and resonance of the voice. And every one of these is different, basically, between Ian's culture and Tula's throughout the movie. So there's multiple scenes where you can just see how differently they have to interact with each other when they kind of get outside of their own cultural bubbles. And I think that's a pretty cool dynamic in this movie as well. Real briefly, we'll talk about the cultural conflict in My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Obviously, it was pretty clear that culturally they're so different that there's going to just be a lot of conflict, but the movie does a really good job of working to resolve that over the course of the movie. We see it arise specifically because Tula deviates from what is considered the norm and what is expected in their Greek household. However, throughout the movie, you see them kind of learning to become more and more enmeshed, to integrate a little bit. And there's a really cool scene at the end where Gus, the father, actually kind of at the wedding reception brings like a moment of acceptance to the stage by referencing the Greek root of their last name being the fruit orange, and then the Greek last name of the Millers being the fruit apple. So in the end, they're all fruit is the idea, and it just kind of, everyone laughs, and it's like, great, we all get along now. So that was kind of a cool scene. In conclusion, I think that My Big Fat Greek Wedding is a great movie to dissect through specifically this lens of intercultural communication. It makes you watch it in a new way after kind of going through all the stuff that we've talked about this semester. But it also stands as a good example of how differences in cultures are not impenetrable, and how if we're willing to work together, we can integrate and learn to get along and to maybe acculturate to a certain extent. So these are my references. One of them is an article, and then of course I had the textbook, and then the movie itself, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. So if you have the chance, I would highly suggest giving a look at this movie, taking a look at it, and observing it through the lens of intercultural communication. Thanks for watching.